Does being a real estate investor sound glamorous and impressive, or maybe impossible? Is this something that you've been interested in, but you didn't know where to begin, or maybe you felt like it was for other lucky people, but not for yourself? Or maybe you felt that it's an impossible dream, so you gave up before you ever got started. Well, I totally get it. I've been through the same thoughts and experiences many, many times. I've had some major, major obstacles that I didn't think I'd ever overcome. And I've had what some would consider major failures along the way. But I don't consider them failures because I truly believe that when you fail, you grow. Without failures, you will get nowhere. It's the getting back up, brushing off the dust, and making another attempt. That's what really matters. Now, I've thought a long time about whether or not I should share my story with others. I've shared some pieces and parts with select people, but not everything. Even as I'm saying it right now, I'm still unsure that I'm going to share everything about my personal story. But if investing in real estate is your dream, I do want to encourage you to go for it. The stories I've heard from others that they've shared have always been inspiring to me. So even though I'm hesitant to share my story, I also feel it's my duty since hearing the stories of so many others made such an impact on my life. So as I go through this series of real estate investment videos, I'm going to share how I got started, how I bought my first place, how it turned into a negative cash flow situation, how I lost my stable W-2 job right after I bought that first place, how I got a second rental, which was semi-intentional, and how I helped my mom buy her first rental, eventually bought a third home, and then traded up the original rental that was barely making any cash flow for a lot of years for a great cash flowing 4-unit multifamily. Then I did it again a year later. Basically how I went from struggling to pay the mortgage on one tiny condo that I was living in to owning 9 cash flowing units, all with some major financial obstacles sprinkled along the way, living in one of the most expensive areas in the country, growing a family, and having a child with medical issues. So if you've failed at an attempt to be a real estate investor, if you haven't been able to buy your first home even, you've had some financial struggles or even medical setbacks, I'm here to tell you to stand up, brush the dirt off your knees, learn from your failures and your falls, and give it another go. The rewards will be worth it. So since I first got into real estate investing accidentally, the path that I took to this point where I'm at now wasn't well planned or thought out. Let me start by saying I always wanted to own my own business as far back as I can remember, probably even in high school. Both of my parents had their own businesses, and I'm more of a creative type, and I couldn't imagine myself sitting at a desk from 8 to 5, 5 days a week for 30 years. But there were a number of years that I felt an obligation to do, as so many others do, and I spent a few years working in the corporate world, but I was seriously miserable. I clearly remember the feeling of dread every morning when my alarm went off and the feeling of relief at the end of the day that it was over. And then just a couple of hours later, feeling the dread all over again before I went to bed, knowing that when I woke up in the morning, I'd have to do it all over again. There were more than a few times I actually cried on the train on the way home, and that's how much I hated being stuck in a 9-to-5 job. And it wasn't the job that was so bad or the people, well, most of the people. There were a few really horrible people I'd spend my day trying to avoid as much as possible. The last few months I had at that corporate job, I had spent so much of my time, every second really, planning my escape, planning for a business that I could create myself. I went to college for music performance and also had a degree from a technical school in IT and network administration, which was in the field of the job I was doing in the corporate world. I was also teaching music on the weekends because I'd always done that. That was my jam. So that part was easy. Anyway, I figured out that it was actually possible for me to make a full-time business and income from teaching music. And that's what I ended up doing. It was scary because at that point I owned a home and I had a huge mortgage that needed to be paid, but I did it with music. Eventually, my music business grew. I rented a commercial space and I hired other teachers to work with me. It was a lot of work, but I never spent a day crying about my job or dreading the people because I was doing what I loved to do. So at this point, I owned a condo and rented a commercial building. That landlord of that building was a man who was like in his 80s or 90s, I remember having conversations with him when he'd come by sometimes about real estate and all the real estate that he owned. The building I rented had a house that was on the same property right behind my commercial building. He also owned the huge commercial building next door, which used to have the business that he did before he retired. It actually was still running in it. And he owned the whole entire parking lot behind me. He basically owned half the city block on both sides of two different streets. Over the years, I'd ask him questions, how he got started, what else he owned, and he was a wealth of information. The biggest piece of information I learned from him was that owning these properties gave him freedom. He could retire comfortably. He bought homes for his children and their families in the most expensive neighborhoods around. I remember him complaining about the expensive pool that his son wanted in his backyard. He thought it was really, really extravagant, but it wasn't like he couldn't afford to do it, so he went ahead and put the pool in. It was around that time that I realized I wanted this freedom too, but I didn't think it was attainable for the average person. What I learned from him was that he didn't go from 0 to 100 all at once. I mean, he was in his 80s or 90s at that point. He started with 1 and then 2, and then he made a deal with a guy he met. And then at some point he met another landowner who offered him a property swap, which turned out to be a great deal for him in the long run. It was little steps along the way that got this man to this point. He did not start off with a family that had a lot of money. He started off as a young man and he enlisted in the military. He learned a trade and eventually opened a business, and he took a chance on buying some real estate. And my time spent learning from him made me realize that's what I wanted to do too. So he's no longer with us. His name was Chuck, and I'm gonna cry thinking about it. I appreciated all of his little tidbits, and I don't think he ever realized what an impact he had on me. Years later, when I became an accidental landlord, I decided to get into real estate as an agent. It wasn't until several years later that I really saw how owning rental property was actually a business itself. And then it took a few more years before I learned how I could make it happen for myself. So what should you do to get started on your journey? I suggest you start by figuring out why you want to invest in real estate in the first place. Do you want a full-time career in real estate? Do you just want to supplement your income with some extra passive income? Or do you want to replace all of your income entirely with rental income? Do you want financial security? Do you want to get rich? Do you want to support your family, to leave a legacy for your children? There are so many possible answers to this question, and it's different for everyone. There is no wrong answer here. Everyone is on a different journey. What is your why? Go ahead and write it down. And even if it seems crazy impossible, put in what your goals might be in this world of real estate. Just dream big. Just put it all down. Just do it. Have fun with it. So now that you have your whys, goals, and dreams written down, keep those notes somewhere, because when things get hard, you're going to need to go back to them and remind yourself why you started on this journey in the first place. The next step is to start learning. Learn as much as you possibly can about real estate and real estate investing. It doesn't matter if you're brand new or experienced. Everyone, and I mean everyone, has something new that they can learn in real estate. Absolutely no one person knows everything there is to know about real estate investing. No one. So don't let them convince you that their way is the only way. It's virtually impossible. So be hungry for information. Even if it doesn't seem to apply to what you think your goals are, learn it anyway. You never know how that information will help you down the road. Start by reading books about real estate investing. I like to search for books recommended by other investors, and there are tons. So I usually narrow down my list by the ones that have the most positive reviews. I prefer to listen to audiobooks, and I find that the best time for me to do that is either on a long drive, alone in the car, or out for a walk. Sometimes I'll walk extra long time just because I'm so into the book that I'm listening to. So it's actually really good for your health too. Another tidbit. So just to give you an idea right now, I looked at my list and I currently have 17 real estate books downloaded in my audio library, which I haven't listened to yet. So 17, that is a lot of books. And I intend to read every single one of them. Every time a new one is recommended that catches my attention, I add it to my list to get to it eventually. I'll put a link below to the subscription service that I use to get my books onto my phone and my iPad, and I'll list some of my absolute all-time favorites. So maybe you could get started with one of those if you're not sure what to listen to. If you want the books for free, a lot of local libraries now offer audiobook downloads too, so check for that as well. There are also loads of podcasts available now on real estate investing, and some of them are bad, but some of them are absolutely fantastic. I remember when I first discovered the first real estate investing website and podcast, that when I first started looking at it, and at the time they had maybe 70 episodes of podcasts that they'd already recorded. And I remember not sleeping much for about a month because I was listening to every single episode, sometimes multiple times, every day, all day. I don't think I watched any TV anymore. It was just full of amazing content. If you're brand new to investing, I suggest you start off by dedicating at least 5 hours a week to books and podcasts, and consider that like you're going to school for real estate. You need to learn everything you possibly need to know, because if you spend the time now, you will have a better outcome because you'll know more. That's just how it works. So after a few months of reading and listening, you will probably have some thoughts one way or the other about what type of investing you want to get into, what your goals are for that first one, and even your next one. The goal is to just get started. It's not to hit your grand slam and achieve your ultimate goal on the first deal. This is a problem so many first-time buyers have. Now, I'm not talking about the people who want to invest in real estate as an income source, just someone who wants to buy a house to live in. A lot of times they just want to go right for the 5-bedroom, 3-bath, 3-car garage house with the white picket fence as their first home. And in most cases, waiting until you can get into the ultimate dream home will make it take longer than it would have if you had started off with a starter home and build some equity and used it as a step up. This is especially true right now in our current economy as we're seeing inflation go up. Keeping cash, saving for the down payment isn't going to keep up with inflation the way owning real estate will, but that's a topic for a completely different video. Anyway, okay. So do these things this week. Write down your why, download some real estate investing books, start listening, reading to some podcasts, anything you can get your hands on as much as you can. And remember, I'm going to put a few of my favorite book titles in the description as a suggestion to get you started. If you remember, come back and leave a comment to tell me what book you read and what you thought about it. If you found a great book, leave the title in the comments so I can add it to my list too, because I only have 17. Let's make it 25 after this video. Anyway, I'm excited to start sharing more about real estate investing. Next time, let's talk about making a plan for your why and start planning your next investment. Let's figure out what type of property you might consider investing in. Where's it located? And possibly the most important part is I'll talk about how to look further down the road when you get to your first one so that you can set up yourself to make the next one even easier. And I'll share more about my story and my future plans in a future video too. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to add your favorite real estate book in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.